What are they going to say at your funeral? When you were a kid, did you ever have to write your obituary? It can be kind of an interesting exercise if you've done it. It's an opportunity to think about what you hope you're going to do in life, what you hope you're going to accomplish, what you hope that maybe your life is going to look like in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I suppose it's normal, huh? I mean, we go to funeral after funeral of people who mean so much to us, and we want to believe that when it's our turn, when finally we leave this world, that we will have meant something to someone else too, that we're going to make an impact. But I don't know about you, but when I was little and I would think about that, I'd always think about scenes like this. This comes from a movie called The Outsiders. It's based on a novel that was set in 1960s Tulsa, Oklahoma. It talks about a group of kids who don't have much, who don't have a lot of parental supervision, they're poor, they're on the outside. And the two guys who break in that building, they're guilty of murder. Now, it was self-defense, but nobody cares, not about kids like that. But they're driving by this schoolhouse. They see it's on fire. They notice their kids trapped inside, so they stop, they rush in, and one by one, they save those kids from that fire before the whole thing comes crashing down on them. They walk in that schoolhouse as outsiders. They come out as heroes. You know, when you think about your legacy, your impact, when you think about how you're going to be remembered, it's easy to think about stuff like that, huh? Big acts of heroism that get your paper and the picture in the paper and the news. Big buildings that are built and that stand for generations. Accomplishments that garner attention, piles of money and fame and glory, but that's not real. That's a fantasy. You see, that's not the life that God has put in front of me, and it's not the life that God has put in front of you. Truth is, we don't serve God in the life of our daydreams. We don't serve God in the life of our fantasies. We serve God in the life that He's placed in front of us. And nothing hurts the people that God has put in our life like forgetting that. Tabitha served God in the life that was in front of her. In our sermon text, we have an opportunity to go to her funeral. And for as much as times have changed and as much as the culture is different, it's a funeral just like we go to today. Someone has died. People are sad. There's awkward conversations. There's an uneasiness as you stand there in the grave and you stare your own mortality in the face. I don't care when you lived or who you are. But we come to this funeral and we have an opportunity to see the impact she made by serving God in the life that was in front of her. Luke writes, in Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek, her name is Dorcas. She's always doing good and helping the poor. About that time, she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa, so when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, please, come at once. Peter went with them. And when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying, and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. At the end of her life, how was she described? She was always doing good and helping the poor. Do you know what it says literally in the Greek? It says she was full of good works. Just full of them. And when they bring forth the evidence of those good works, do they bring forth blueprints of great cathedrals she built to God's glory? Do they show all kinds of medals that she won as she marched into burning buildings and saved people from certain death? Do they parade forth generations of children who became the who's who of the world in which they lived? No. They bring clothes because she made clothes. And she took those clothes, and when someone needed them, she gave them to them. It's not earth-shattering work. But it made an impact. It mattered. She served God in the life that God had placed in front of her. You see, we serve God in the life that He's placed in front of us. And there's no better way to hurt the people God has placed in your life than to forget that. Because nothing hurts your spouse more than to tell your spouse that you'll do anything for him except take out the garbage. That you'll die for your kids, but you won't take 5 minutes to play catch in the backyard. You won't go to a recital that you think is boring. You won't be the bad guy and give them the discipline they need. That you'll be there for your parents and your siblings and your cousins and your neighbors, no matter what. Unless it's inconvenient. Unless they say something to offend you, in which case you hold a grudge like nobody else can. You see, these are the people God has placed in front of us. And sometimes it's as if we're waiting for a scene like this to find our burning schoolhouse with children that we can finally march in and come to the rescue and be the people that we know we're supposed to be, but that is not our life. And that is so vain, isn't it? Because it's all about me then, about getting credit, about getting recognition, about being noticed for the great things we do. And that's not what service is in the life in front of us. Because if you go home today and you take out the garbage and someone says congratulations, I think they're being sarcastic. And if you go and you give your kids the discipline they need, they're not going to say thank you. And if you go and you help out your neighbor, they might just take and take and take and not reciprocate or ever say thank you. But it's not about us. You know, at some point, our time on this earth is going to end. At some point, it's going to be our funeral people attend. And when they think about the life we've lived, do we want them to see a life like Tabitha? A life where someone served in the life that God put in front of them, used what they had to serve God, whatever that was, even if it seems small? Or are they going to remember someone that they were there, they needed to depend on, but wasn't dependable? Are they going to remember someone who had all kinds of gifts and abilities, but only used them to serve themselves? Are they going to remember someone from whom they needed forgiveness, but who could only hold a grudge? Are they going to remember someone who always talked about loving them, but never really got around to it? What are they going to say at your funeral? Honestly, think about that question. Is that enough? Even if you rushed into burning building after burning building, even if your mantle was full of awards and medals, even if you had built skyscraper upon skyscraper that's going to stand for generations, even if you had the most impressive life you can imagine, would being remembered for those things chase away the chill of death? Is that really what you want to hold on to as you leave this world behind? We've got to have something more than that. Because the truth is, I don't know what my funeral is going to be like. I don't know if I'm going to be surrounded by kids and grandkids or if I'll outlive them all. I don't know if it'll be in a big fancy church like this or in some funeral home because no one thinks anyone's going to come. I don't know if they're going to talk about the impact it made in their lives or if they're going to talk more about who the Packers drafted or what the weather's like. But I know this. We're not talking about Tabitha's funeral 2,000 years later just because she made a bunch of clothes. Continue. Peter went with them. And when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas made while she was still with them. Peter sent them all out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning toward the dead woman, he said, "Tabitha, get up." She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He took her by the hand and helped her to her feet. Then he called for the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. You know, if you lived in Joppa before this, you might have heard about Tabitha. But after this, I don't care who you are, everyone knew about it. Who knows how many people are in heaven because of what happened at her funeral? One of the greatest things God did for her was what happened at that funeral, because now she has an eternal legacy. All kinds of people who heard about Jesus and who shared in the same eternal life that she has through it. It's amazing what God does when Christians live the life in front of them, how he works life. I don't know what they're going to say at your funeral, but I know this. At some point, Jesus is going to stand outside of your tomb. At some point, he's going to call you out the same way he called out Tabitha. And when that day comes, you are going to rise, but you're going to rise in a different way than Tabitha rose. Because at some point, she had another funeral, and that one stuck. But not you. You're going to rise without any of your physical maladies. You're going to rise with health that's never going to betray you again. You're going to rise with a body that's perfect and glorious. You're going to rise to live in a paradise God has prepared for you. It's the whole reason he came, why Jesus died and rose. He walked out of the tomb so he could take you with him, body and soul. And understanding that makes all the difference in the world. Because there are miles of difference between chasing a legacy and living the life that God has placed in front of you. You see, when you chase a legacy, it's all about how much credit you get, how much impact you get, whether or not it's big enough to be noticed and to be remembered. And it can so easily be so vain and so self-serving. But when you just live the life God's placed in front of you and you remember that it's an everlasting one, when you remember that the moment you close your eyes in death, even if that's today, you're going to open your eyes to be with God in heaven immediately. When you remember that even if today is a day that your soul is separated from your body, that you're going to get one back on the last day better than ever, it frees you up. You can just serve God in the life he's placed in front of you, and you don't have to impress anyone. And you don't have to care if anyone ever remembers. And you don't have to watch the headlines to see if anyone noticed it. When you fail, you hold onto the cross and the beauty of the forgiveness that's yours there. When you succeed, you know that God is the one who granted you that success and that it has eternal results, and you don't care how much people noticed it. You can just lose yourself in service to others, knowing that there we show God's love. And when through that love people are brought to Jesus, God works eternal results. It matters. Tabitha, she made clothes, but it mattered. Who knows how many people are in heaven right now because of the Christian life she lived, because of the way she pointed people to Jesus' love, and the way God pointed them to life through her. When I think about the Christian life in action, I don't think about these great grand acts of heroism like people running into a fire and saving children. I think about people just living the life that God put in front of them, whatever it is. I think about Anthony, who didn't have much. But he got to know a lady in his neighborhood named Layla who became like a grandmother figure for him. And she didn't have much either, but everything she valued she kept in her basement. And one day her basement filled up with sewage, like a lot of sewage. And she was beside herself, and so Anthony, he went down there, waded through it, took several trips. He got all the stuff she wanted him to get out. And when he told me about it a week later at church, he had to stop in the middle of the story 4 or 5 times because he kept gagging. I don't know how many other people he told her if he ever could tell the story, but I tell you what, That's love in action. I think about a Kentucky State Trooper who pulls over an old Suburban pulling this old pop-up camper with a back wheel smoking because the driver didn't notice that the tire was flat. And when he got to the car, he looks inside and he sees 4 screaming kids and a husband who's eating crow because his wife told him those tires were too old to make it to Tennessee, but he thought he could do it anyways. And he blocks off the lane of traffic so I can change the tire. Shakes his head when I get the spare out, and the spare is even older than the tire that went flat, won't even hold air. Then he takes the tire, drives into town, wakes up his friend who owns a tire shop, repairs the tire, brings it back, helps me put it on. Then he takes us into town, gets us a good rate at a hotel, and the next morning he makes sure, first thing, we get our other tire fixed and we can be on our way. When I tried to say thank you, you know what he said? In a thick Kentucky accent, he said, "Don't worry, my pastor's not too good at this stuff either." I don't even know his name, and I doubt I'll be at his funeral. But that's a Christian life in action. It's not medals, it's not awards, it's not headlines. It's just serving God in the life He's placed in front of you. So what are they going to say at your funeral? I don't know. Who cares? You won't be there. You'll be in heaven, living the life that Jesus won for you. But what you do now matters. And when you're in that paradise, take some time to look around. You might recognize some faces. It's amazing what God does with a life lived in love, how He uses our common, everyday acts of service to point people to Jesus and to grant them life. Amen.